Hello there, good people of the world. You're looking fantastic today. No, not you, but you. I like it. Big Heavy coming at you, and wanted to give you a report on a 12-hour ultramarathon that I recently finished. If you're unfamiliar with ultramarathons or the 12-hour format, the ultramarathon's pretty easy to explain. It's basically any running distance that's longer than a traditional marathon, which is typically 26.2 miles. These timed format runs, and they're typically 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 is kind of the three that you'll see most often, is a race where instead of having a fixed distance, you have a fixed time. And it's usually around a looped course of some sort. In this case, it was a 5K or about 3-mile trail loop. And basically you try and get as many laps done as you can within the confines of that time limit. I've heard of some of these where you go around a traditional quarter-mile oval track and bang out as many laps as you can. In this case, it was a typical trail kind of near my hometown. The terrain here is generally kind of rolling hills, single track, rooty sort of trail. So sort of had the home court advantage. It's a place I've run quite a bit, a local greenway, but had never done a 12-hour or kind of time limit type of event, and have only done one ultra previously to doing this, and that was a 50K in this same greenway. Did it in about 7 hours. I wasn't really looking for time as much as I was looking for just completing the damn thing. So that's the extent of my ultra running experience to this point. In this case, the 12-hour segment that the event took place over was from noon on a Saturday to midnight. So there was some night running in there, kind of started out midday. This is a pretty popular greenway, so lots of people sort of roaming around. There were, walkers, joggers, some horses on the course. So that made it kind of fun. You had people giving you a little thumbs up during the earlier portion of the race, and then around 6, the greenway closed and things got a little quiet. Sun started to set. It's winter time around here, so sun was down by 5:30ish, and towards the end of the race, obviously it was at midnight. It was pretty much pitch black, and kind of an interesting time to be out on the trails and sort of get to experience some quiet and some time in the woods. In terms of the training I did for this event, it was frankly inappropriate might be the right word. I was really focused on our local half marathon, which was 1 week prior to this race. All my training was around trying to get a personal best in that race. My target was a 1 hour 46 time, and I didn't make it. I was cruising for the first 8-ish miles, and then just the wheels came off. And if you've done any kind of running, you may have experienced this at some point, where you're just cruising, you're feeling good, and then who knows what happened. Best explanation I have is it was a really humid day. It was not super hot, but there was kind of the remnants of a hurricane that had passed through the southeast relatively recently. So super humid, was sweating a lot, just body didn't react well to that. So it is what it is. I finished in a 1:53, which for me is okay-ish, but obviously wasn't my goal. And I had signed up for this 12-hour race probably 4 or 5 months ago. Didn't really do the mental computation that it was 1 week after a half. Didn't really put in any special training because I was so focused on that half, and finished the half, was a little bit disappointed with myself, and then sort of looked at the calendar and was like, holy crap, I got this 12-hour ultra the next weekend. And I spent most of the week prior kind of recovering from the half. It took a lot out of me. So basically I don't think I did anything more than 3 or 4 miles that week prior. Tried to get some stretching in, did some spins on the bike to try and kind of recover, and basically went into the half without a lot of expectations. I think my number one goal was to just kind of keep trucking for as long as I could. Ideally, keep moving for the entire 12 hours. My sort of secondary stretch-ish kind of goal was to get 50K in. That's the longest I've ever run. That would be about 10 laps. And then my stretch goal was to do an 11th lap. Basically set a new distance record for myself. That's kind of what I went in with. And in terms of how I was going to run the race, my strategy was pretty simple. Generally I'm wired such that I can keep going for a pretty long time as long as I keep my body under a zone 3 heart rate. If you're not a runner, basically any kind of athletic event, I think it's not just particular to endurance sports, they'll, people will look at their heart rate. That's kind of a proxy for how much effort you're putting out. Divide it into zones. Typically it's 5 or 6 different zones. If you've ever gone on any sort of gym equipment, where you can hold on to those little hand grips and it gives you your heart rate, it'll generally give you a zone that's based off your age or something like that. You can get more detailed and refine those zones, but zone 3 is typically where you're starting to work a little harder. What the reference point is anything below that is where you can, run, bike, whatever, and carry on a comfortable conversation. So it's a pretty slow pace. I wasn't going after it by any means. I was trying to keep myself consistent and stay below that zone 3 so I would have some reserve and ideally be able to keep running for those 12 hours. The other element of my strategy was to walk all the hills. That's pretty typical in ultra running. And again, that kind of dovetailed with my desire to keep myself out of zone 3. And this course probably had half a mile of flat trail, and then the rest of it, the other 3.5 miles was rollers. So there was a 700-foot elevation gain throughout the 5K, which doesn't seem like a lot, but all those were in doses of 50 to 150 feet. So kind of kept your body working except for those couple of flat spots. So in terms of how it went, the weather was just about perfect. I think when we started it was about 55 degrees, low humidity, sunshine, not a lot of wind, just a beautiful day. And again, this is in a greenway, so there were a lot of people out with their families. I think people that were out for their afternoon promenade pretty quickly figured out there were a bunch of goofballs doing this long run. So, you'd go by people and they'd be like, oh, hey, keep going, that's awesome. And give you a little bit of a mental boost. When I started, I was in a big pack of folks, and this is only my second ultra, but my first one I ended up kind of being by myself most of the race. This one, same thing happened. I don't know why that occurs, because you always hear people talk about ultras and how you find someone to run with, and there's all this great camaraderie and all this stuff. That didn't really happen in my case, although I would see runners pretty regularly since it was a loop course. I got passed and occasionally passed a few people and would chat with them for a little bit. But for the most part, just kind of kept with my goal to stay below zone 3. I ultimately kind of surprised myself. So I ended up doing 13 laps. I finished 13 out of 48 people. So, my goal is to usually be in the upper mid pack. So was able to meet that. Ended up doing just shy of 40 miles. So my watch indicated 39.8. I think on the race clock it was 38.6 or something like that, and that's pretty typical. Usually you meander a little bit while you're running one of those things. And I think what ultimately helped me kind of go 2 laps above even my stretch goal was sort of a dumb miscalculation on my part. So I set my watch up to not show me the distance I had run, and basically instead just had a lap count on there. And every time I would go through the 5K loop, I'd hit my lap button, look at my splits for the lap and see how I was doing. And for some reason I got in my head that the count on my watch was the lap I was currently on. So, after running my first lap, I hit the button and it said, lap 1, and I assumed I was on lap 1, even though I was actually starting to run lap 2. So it was kind of funny. I went through the checkpoint, and these types of races have a little, in this case had sort of a little flagged area that you'd have to run through, and someone was standing there checking numbers and would write down which lap you're on. And the guy's like, hey, you just did 50K, and they give you a little pin. And I was like, no, I'm a lap short. And he's like, no, you just did 50K. And I was a little bit confused at that point, as one gets after doing something for a while, and started to argue. And then he's like, no, I've got all the stuff here. And I was like, huh, all right. And I was mentally, fully prepared to run another couple laps and try and get to 12, which in my head was 12 laps, but in reality was 13 laps. So I did that, and I was like, all right, I definitely got 2 more laps in me. So I think that's how I exceeded my, my stretch goal by a lap. In terms of pacing, I think my first 6 loops around the course, so about 24 miles, I was pretty consistent. I was running a 39 to 40 minute split time for that 5K lap, which is slow for a road 5K. Probably still a little slow for a longer trail run. Obviously super slow if you're just trying to bang out a 5K on the trails and go kind of full speed. And then after that, my pace started to decay. I started to walk more. At the end of the race, I was just sort of hobbling around the course. I think my last laps were like an hour 5, an hour 6 minutes. But again, my goal was to try and get in as many laps as I could and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I was frankly a bit surprised. My cardio system held up fairly well. Even at the end, I felt like I could keep going for another, maybe couple, 3 laps in terms of just, heart, lungs kind of capability. My legs were starting to deteriorate at the end of the race. My feet were the biggest problem. I had a little bit of a rock in my shoe, and at that point I was like, I only have 1 lap left. I'm not going to take off my shoe. I'm not going to stop and sit down. I ended up getting a big old blister where that rock was. My feet were just kind of generally sore. I tripped a couple or 3 times, as you do when you're trail running, and my feet were done, I think, before the rest of my body. So the key takeaway from that, and the lesson I learned, is if I'm going to do something like this, I'm going to do something that's 12 hours or longer, really need to put in a lot of training just getting time on your feet. That can be hard. You don't want to do too many long runs, but I think time on feet is probably one of the most important things you can do for this type of race. I was actually kind of surprised of the 50-ish people that started. Towards the end, there were only 5 or 6. It was actually kind of cool in that the race was a loop around a lake. So at certain points you could look out and essentially see most of the course, even though the trail was in the woods. You could see people's headlamps, and it went from, after the sunset, probably a dozen plus headlamps out there to when I threw in the towel around 11:05-ish. I think there were 4 or 5 headlamps remaining. And I threw in the towel because my feet were done, and I probably wouldn't have been able to get that last lap in unless I picked up the pace a bit, and my feet weren't feeling too good about that. So overall, I was really happy with my performance, especially with my rather lackluster training and really non-specific training that I put in before this. Would I do one of these again? I think so. I kind of like that format. I sort of like that idea of you've got a block of time but an unspecified goal. I don't think I could do this type of format on a track, just going around a paved track. I'd probably lose my mind. I think this would also be pretty tough if you were on a course that was on roads. I think that amount of time running on a hard road versus a trail, at least you're moving your feet around. You get a little bit more dynamic movement. I think that keeps you fresh a little bit longer. So I would definitely consider another trail format, 12-hour. Might consider a 24-hour at some point in the future. But it was kind of a cool format. I was also surprised by the recovery period was pretty reasonable. That night I got home around midnight-ish after the race, took a shower, didn't sleep very well at all. My legs were kind of sore. My brain was sort of in some weird state of being fired up, so didn't get a great sleep. Next night got a pretty good sleep. Spent some time in compression pants and compression socks. That seemed to help with some of the stiffness in the legs. Hit myself with a percussion massager a few times. That's one of those little Theragun things that just sort of bangs on you. Basically took 4 or 5 days off running. Got back out yesterday for a run, which was 8 days later, and felt pretty good. Did a couple or 3 spins on the bike in the interim, which is just a light effort on an exercise bike. So it didn't beat me up as much as I thought it would. I think mentally it was kind of fun to go out there and do something hard over a long duration. It was also interesting to me, I probably did the first 5 or 6 laps without any music or anything, just sort of taking in the scenery, getting used to the flow of the course, trying not to trip. And interestingly, the first 4 laps I tripped in the exact same spot every single lap, and then finally learned to avoid the route that I kept tripping over. But it was just sort of in that flow state for the first third of the race. Second third of the race, listened to a book on tape via my watch. It was a Jordan Peterson book that was getting a little out there. I was 7-8 hours into it and hearing about dragons and how they're a metaphor for life and all that stuff. I did walk a lap with somebody I knew on the course. That was kind of nice. And then my wife came out and did my second to last lap with me around like 10:30 or so. So, we had this nice night. I wouldn't say it was a run. I wouldn't necessarily call it a walk. It was sort of an amble/stumble, at least on my part. And, we had a good hour together to chat before I did my last lap, essentially kind of by myself. And at that point was just ready to kind of get it done and feeling good about what I had accomplished. So if you're contemplating one of these things, if you're contemplating your first ultra or your first, 6, 12, 24-hour type event, the best advice I can give you is to just go and do it. That sounds a bit trite, but that's effectively the advice I got in the guise of the David Goggins book, Can't Hurt Me. I did a little review on that book. No one really watches those book review videos, but I'll highly recommend that book once again. I'll put a link to it in the description, but essentially the key takeaway for me from that book was you're capable of more than you think you are. And the best way to validate that is to just go out and do something that you previously would have thought impossible. And I'm somebody that hated running, that probably never ran more than a mile in their life until, my 30s when I did my first 5K, and thought that was the most challenging and, amazing and profound and difficult event I'd ever done. And never even considered I'd do anything beyond a 5K. Here I am, able to run 40 miles, and there's nothing special or athletically gifted about me. I'm pretty much the extent of my athletic talent is the ability to put one foot in front of the other and stumble along without much grace or beauty to that stumbling. So if you're thinking about this type of thing, get out there and do it. I think the biggest piece of training advice I'll give you, and this is not expert advice, but get that time on your feet, particularly if you're going to do a 12-hour event. I think if you can build up some strength in your feet, you can have that focus of just putting one foot in front of the other, and you can keep yourself in a cardiovascular zone where you're moving, but you're not working too hard and you're not overexerting yourself. I don't see why you couldn't do 24 hours at that kind of pace. So thanks for watching. Best of luck with all your athletic endeavors, and whether it's just getting out and taking a walk around the block, or it's going and doing some crazy 200-mile ultramarathon in the desert somewhere, just get out there and give it a shot. And with that, this is the Big Heavy, wishing you happy trails and minimal falling, and best of luck in whatever endeavors you undertake. Peace. Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.